along the top. Well, if you prefer, it can be easier on the phone. As long as it's not going to be distracting. Yeah, okay, so Daniel Siegel. So what I would say is, because we're early, don't let anyone in until it's Michelle. So let her in first. You can have a quick chat with her. Okay, and then co-host her. And if I just get here the participant list up, so you'll be able to see when Michelle's trying to get in. I love how keen people are. Like, there's 11 minutes till this starts. But anyway. Okay. Yeah, what I was just going to say, my experience about the angles, this light is not great. But yeah, if you sit here where I am, well, they're going to be seeing her and presumably her screen, so most of the time. But when you're talking, like when you're doing your intro, just angle it towards you. So like you'll have the angle that I've got. And then when she's talking, you angle it like that. I mean, it's high in the way, but essentially she'll see the people who are seeing it, which is a nice angle. So cool. So I'll leave you to it. Oh, here's Hadran. So I'm going to admit her, and you can do, I'll get out of the way. You can admit her and have a chat to her.
Yes. Thanks. It's a pleasure. Little kids are just much easier. No, it's fine. And is this? Oh, we won't need the microphone.
Yeah, if there's audience questions,
you can pass the microphone around for audience.
Is that COVID friendly? Am I allowed to pass the microphone?
I mean, if you like.
It's sometimes.
Hi, Michelle.
How are you?
Thank God. I'm well. I'm Justine, by the way.
Hi.
I'm your assistant / moderator / tech support person.
Okay.
Yeah. How's things in Israel? Where am I catching you? Where are you?
Ranana. So you want me to write where I'm from on my name?
No. We're just chatting. We're 10 minutes.
No, because I said when I came in that it make sure the name is right and the
okay. All right. No,
right
not.
I don't know. I don't need to.
You're all good. All good.
Okay.
Exciting times in Israel at the moment.
Oh yeah, very.
Wow. So what's the feeling like?
It's exciting. We were very excited last night watching the news.
Amazing.
So yeah. And for my husband's work, I hope it's going to be great because he works on things with the Rabbanit and Eddie team, and it's all the issues that he's been trying to work on that he can't get anywhere for years because of the government. Maybe now we'll be able to change.
Wow.
So yeah.
Very cool.
So we'll see. And he's our neighbor, Bennett, and they're closing the street right next door to us. And you'll hear about it a little bit in the lecture.
Amazing.
Anyway,
is there anything you need
let me ask you a question. I want to share screen and I want to just
I'm gonna
try
make
it
you
out.
co-host.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry,
Is there going to be a recording of this that we could put up on our site at some point or something?
Yeah, there will be a recording.
I'd love to put it up on Hadran's site if that works, or share it with people.
I will pass it. Sorry, I'm just using a computer that is different to my home computer, so I make you a co-host.
Yeah.
All right, so you should be a co-host now.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Let me actually find and pull it up for a minute. Shut everything else on my screen. Share my screen. I think I have to set it up and then I can go like this. Why isn't it working? Oh, there we go. Whoops. Okay. So now if I do stop share and I do share screen again, now it'll come at full screen. Okay, great. Perfect.
Okay, you're happy with that?
Yeah, do you want to leave this up while people come in?
However you want to do it, that's fine. I'll just tell you, so I'm gonna have myself for the intro, so you'll see me like this. And then we're gonna we'll swing the screen around so that you can see the audience once we begin.
Okay.
I'll get people to sit closer. People like to hide at the back of the room. We are recording. I'll just see if there's.
I want to know if okay, so most people are in the audience and not going to be online, I guess.
No, we have a mixture.
Okay, so if I want to ask people if anyone's learning Daf Yomi and get a show of hands, I guess on the video people could see a show of hands. And is the chat open that people could chat and write that they're learning Daf Yomi?
Yes, I will manage the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have to. I just thought it'd be nice to ask, and people could see if other people are learning, to get a sense that people see, oh, there's people out there learning, assuming there are people learning the Daf.
Yeah, so I can put the chat on the screen if you give me some, just let me know. If you make an announcement, can you put on the chat? Then I'll show the chat on the screen so that the local audience can see the chat as well.
I see. Okay, that'll be confusing if they're watching that and me speaking now, or that'll work. I guess it could be on the side. You'll just do it for a minute anyway.
It'll just be for a minute, and I'll keep it on the side.
Fine. And I'm going to flip back between sharing screen and not sharing screen, because when I share screen, you can't see me as well, which I think isn't great when you speak. So I'm going to flip a little back and forth.
Amazing.
Okay.
Amazing. Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes to go.
Okay, great.
Can you see I'm moderating? Do I look official? I'm right next to a laptop. We haven't let anyone in the room yet. Should I let them in?
Are we doing questions and answers after?
Yes.
Is it possible here? How are we doing that?
I have a microphone, and so the local audience can ask on the microphone.
And other people through the chat, and you'll ask me the questions? And
I will ask you the questions through the chat. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I don't need to be reading the chat.
No, don't worry about the chat. I think you should focus on presenting.
Okay.
And I will manage the chat.
Okay, great.
Does that work for you?
I'm going to ask near the beginning if anyone's learned Daf Yomi sometime within the first 5 minutes. And then you can put it, I'll ask people to either raise their hands in the audience or put it in the chat, and then just for a minute, and then you can take it off.
Right.
Okay, great.
Is she in?
No, but now I think that I can send to her, so she can work there. Is this available online?
Yes, you can see that online. Guys, can I ask you to come and sit closer, because I'm actually going to move the laptop so that Michelle can see what is actually being read as well from you. So, Michelle, we've got someone asking an early question.
Okay.
They've brought their duff with them, and they want to know, are they going to need the duff?
So they don't really need it. I'm going to be I'm going to be teaching a small portion of the daf, and I'm going to put it all up on the screen, but they can use it if they want. All
right, super. Did you hear her answer?
like, I don't really, that's not my Judaism. When you do with Christian children, I say,
Yeah.
probably once one day, I don't do it all the time.
So is it 9 a.m. by you, Michelle?
It's 10, it's 9, yeah, 9 a.m. And I've already taught 2 shiurim today.
Oh my Lord. A keen bean. I know, that's what she, 2 shiurim. Wow.
I teach in Hebrew and then in English, the daf, early in the morning.
Gee. Are you doing it with her? Oh, we have one of your
nice.
Yomi people in the audience.
What's her name?
You need Ellie. Come. She's coming to introduce herself.
Great.
Hi, I usually do it after work, so I don't get to it till the evenings, but we've done with Di Creature, a few of us when we joined
Nice.
recently.
What's your name?
Ellie
Ellie what?
Temple.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's great. Thanks for introducing yourself.
You've got a fan club here. Someone has also posted online that they're also learning with the Daf Yomi group and that they're very excited to be here. Oh, and
Nice.
Di is going to join us.
Oh, great.
Well,
Excellent.
hi, Di. Oh, they're planning their Siyum already. There you go. Okay, so we might start. Michelle, thank you for joining us. If you're at home on Zoom, please make sure you're on mute, but do join us with your video. We'd love to see you. Did Judy work it out? Judy, I don't have Judy, but I do have, no. She'll be there soon. Okay. All right, so you've got some fans here, Michelle. So I'm going to give a very brief intro. Michelle Farber is the founder of Hadran, whose mission is to advance Talmud study for all women. She's also the founder and teacher of Daf Yomi for Women, the first women's online shiur on Daf Yomi. Michelle spearheaded the first international Siyum Hashas for women. She and her husband Seth founded and led Kehilat Netivot in Ra'anana, where they live with their 5 children. And we're super excited, Michelle, to have you here with us. And I'm going to minimize and mute myself and hand over to you.
Such an honor to be here. I want to start with the title of my lecture, When Things Don't Go Exactly as Planned. Well, it's kind of funny that that's the title of the lecture because, as you know, it's morning here in Israel. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. And I could tell you that my day was a bit of a kind of day where things don't go exactly as planned. So I'll try to keep the story short, but give you a sense of what happened this morning. My daughter had a class trip last night and got home close to midnight. And it wasn't likely she was going to go to school first thing this morning. Just to give you some background, I teach Daf Yomi twice a day in the morning, 6:20 in Hebrew and 7:10 in English. So I've had a full morning already. And in between my two, so my plan was, I figured going to sleep at midnight, she'd wake up at 10, which was perfect. My lecture would be over at 10. And worst case, I had backup. A daughter of mine was home. She could be with her. And my daughter's the type that could potentially walk into the room while I'm lecturing. So it wasn't really going to work if she was up and around and about the house. So in between my 2 classes this morning, I get a WhatsApp from my daughter, the older one, saying, I forgot that I have a driving lesson this morning. And my husband had left early to work because he had a meeting. And he said, well, he knew I had coverage. So he left early for work. And all of a sudden I realized that if she wakes up, I'm kind of in trouble. She's going to walk in the middle of the lecture and I don't know what's going to be. So that was my first kind of unexpected thing this morning. Then luckily she actually woke up early and I said, great. I rushed her out the door. It was in between 8 o'clock and 8:45 when I was supposed to come online on the Zoom. I quickly get her out of bed. I rush her out the door. I start driving to school. And of course there's a few streets I could get through to get to school. But if you know, just last night, we have a new Rosh Mמשhala, a new prime minister in our country, and he happens to live right around the corner from me. Well, as a result of that, there's huge traffic issues in my neighborhood because they're closing the street, which is the through a street that we always go through to get to school. So I take a different route. I say, okay, this will be easy. It's a very narrow street. And of course, big trucks blocking the way, and there's no way I'm getting through that street. Okay, I go around, I finally make it to school, I get home, and I have to start mapping out how exactly am I going to get home, because I don't want to go the route that the big trucks were. The route that I took also was a narrow street. I could likely get stuck there, and I'm really like running by the minute to get to this lecture in time. In any case, I find a good route, I make it home, and all is well. But why did I bring this up? Because one of the things that we're learning in Daf Yomi now is this issue of how do you address things when they don't exactly go as planned? And I thought that I would use that as an example to say how much things in the Gemara are actually relevant to our daily lives, including just something as simple as getting your daughter to school. So I want to just start a little bit about myself before I start learning with you, which is that 9 years ago, I started a project that really transformed my life. And it didn't transform my life in just a minute, or in a day or in a week, but it transformed my life over the course of, I would say, 7.5 years and even beyond today. First, I want to ask how many people in this room that are listening learn Daf Yomi. So those in the audience can kind of do a show of hands. Those in the chat can write or show hands. Just want to get a sense. Can't really see in the audience how many people. Somebody wants to report back. You're on mute.
2 in the audience,
Okay.
and 3, 4, 5, 6 online.
Yes.
Okay, amazing.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to assume then that most of you don't really know what Daf Yomi is, so I'll give you a little bit of a background. Daf Yomi is a learning program that basically says we're going to learn one daf a day. It was started in 1923 by Rabbi Meir Shapiro as a way of joining together Jews from around the world and saying, number one, there's lots of pages of the Gemara that nobody ever gets to. That was one goal, and people should be learning them, pages of the Talmud. There's 2,711 pages of the Talmud. It's a project that takes 7.5 years if you go a daf a day. And the other thing is he wanted to connect people from around the world. He said that, let me just stop my screen. He said that learning, when people meet each other, okay, let's take a group of boys. You get a group of boys together, they don't know each other, they'll start, I don't know what they do in Australia. In America, they'll start shooting basketball. In Israel, they'll start playing soccer, probably what you do in Australia, I'm going to guess, but they bring a ball, they do something, and they have some common bond. And when you get Jews together, Rabbi Meir Shapiro said, I want them to have a common ground of something to have a conversation about. The Jews all around the world, he explains it, a Jew gets off a boat, that was what was going on in those days, and he meets other people, and all of a sudden they have conversation and they talk words of Torah. And maybe I'll share with you a little bit about all the communities. Di is here with us and she can attest to all the communities that have developed through learning together. And it's something that's a very strong, powerful thing. For me, I fell in love with learning Talmud in high school. In 9th grade, I had a teacher who really made the Talmud come alive and relevant. And it instilled in me a love of it, a little bit. I was still a 9th grader. As time went on, I continued and pursued, and I taught Talmud in many different, I taught in high school, I taught in post-high school programs, I taught things that connected with Talmud, were based in Talmud, not necessarily only Talmud. But 9 years ago, it was before the previous cycle started, I decided to teach a Daf Yomi class. What motivated me? What motivated me was I felt that I wanted people to understand the richness and greatness of the Talmud. And if I teach in a classroom, you can get to X number of people, but it's a limited number of people. But if you teach Daf Yomi and you put it on the internet, the reach is so much greater. And even if people aren't listening, the fact that people know, when I looked on the internet to see how do people teach a Daf Yomi class, what I noticed is there were no Daf Yomi classes taught by women online at all. You can find hundreds of Daf Yomi shiurim online, and there was nothing for women. And something I've always been trying to promote all my life is Talmud study for women. And why is that? Because Talmud is something that for many, many years was mostly closed to women, and it wasn't an area that women went into, and usually because women weren't intellectually oriented, and the Talmud is quite complicated, and it's an intellectual type book. And the rabbis closed it to the women because they felt that the women would never properly understand it. There were always individual women that learned Talmud that were known and well respected, but it was always on an individual, small group kind of basis. And only over the last, I would say 70 years from when Rabbi Soloveitchik started teaching Talmud in Maimonides school, and other people, other schools started opening the doors to women to start learning Talmud. Then there was the whole boom of midrashot, one-year programs or more than one-year programs that started opening the doors to women. And this was a huge, huge change. And for me, so I taught Talmud in those environments, but those environments were still very limited, and people might have exposure to Talmud for a year or for a few years, or it would just be a small group of women. And I said, this is something that should be having much more mass appeal. If you look in the world of men, many men around the world learned Daf Yomi, but the amount of women that were doing it was very small. I decided to take the plunge. I didn't really know what it was going to be like to teach a Daf Yomi class and to do it every single day, every day for 2,711 days straight. And to make that commitment and to know how to pack in a ton of information into a 45-minute class is also a big challenge. But I said, see how it goes, see what happens. And since then, I'll give you some highlights. Okay, it started in my house. Okay, here's a picture of a class from the early days. This was taken in the first year that I was teaching. You can see my little recording device there. From day one, I realized it's not just about teaching a class in my house, but I have to put this up on the internet because there have to be women out there. People have to know if there's no high level of women doing something, then the people underneath are going to say, oh, clearly Talmud's not for women. Look, all the teachers are men. And in fact, when I studied, all my teachers were men. I didn't have women role models because it didn't exist then. So it started from my house. For 7.5 years, I taught like this, recording with a group of women. The group changed here and there. Women came, women went. In fact, some of these women are still studying with me today, and 2 from around the table, and on a daily basis. And then it came time for the big Siyum Hashas, which is a huge celebration that happens around the world in different places to celebrate the finishing of this huge accomplishment of getting through 2,711 pages. And we started to question, what are we going to do? Because there's no celebration for women. We can't join a men's celebration. Usually the women are behind the machitza. We spent so many years studying, how are we going to celebrate this amazing occasion? Well, we decided to have a Siyum Hashas for women, which I hope you heard about. Here's just some pictures from it. So here's women on the stage doing the Siyum, and here's a picture of the crowd. Okay, you can see it was a huge crowd. 3,300 people showed up. We had to close registration a week and a half before because we were overfull. And the idea was to have a celebration that celebrated all that had been done until this time, all the efforts of all the women's groups and all the midrashot came, and the places that teach Talmud to women, and groups and women from all over, from all types. And the idea was to have a massive celebration and bring all these women together and show others that this is something that really is open to everyone. And the Siyum was a resounding success. 15,000 people watched it online, 3,300 people attended. And it really made a big change in the world of women's Talmud study. And I would even say also men's Talmud study. So more about that at the end. And what I want to do now is to give you a little bit of a taste of what it is about learning Talmud, what's so interesting, what's so relevant. Many people say, oh, the discussions of the Talmud, they're very complicated, they're up in the air, they're theoretical. What does this have to do with me? So what I like to do when I lecture is to take today's daf, because in fact, when I was asked to lecture, they said, don't worry about taking today's daf, find something interesting, maybe a story, something that will speak to people. And I said exactly the opposite. My theory is that in every page, you can find something that speaks to you, something that's relevant, something that you could take to your life, including driving your daughter to school and trying to figure out how to make it on time to your lecture. And with that, I'm going to start with today's text, and I'm going to connect it a little bit to some of the other texts that we've been studying in the Masechet. We're learning Masechet Yoma. Okay, what you see here, there's 2 goats. Okay, this is our thing. You might be saying 2 goats. What does this have to do with anything? When you think of Yom Kippur, do you think about goats? Probably not. You think about food, about not eating, about sitting in shul all day. Those are the things you think about when you think about Yom Kippur. But when you're learning Masechet Yoma, which is named Yoma, Yoma means Hayom in Hebrew. That's an Aramaic term, Yoma. The Gemara is written in Aramaic. It means the day because this day is the highlight of the year. It's the biggest day. It's the most central day in our religion. And you would think that it all has to do with fasting and praying and all that. Well, we're up to chapter 6. We're mostly through the Masechet. We haven't had a word about fasting. We haven't had a word, I should have said, tshuva, right? Repentance. We have almost nothing explicitly said about repentance yet. Nothing about prayer, none of this. What have we been talking about for 6 chapters? Okay, which we're up to page 64. So 64 pages of the Gemara, actually 63. It starts on Daf Bet, page 2. More of that another time. 64 pages worth of discussions about the sacrifices and the service that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, did on Yom Kippur. Detail upon detail upon detail. You might say, what does this have to do with anything? So we're going to start learning, and then I'm going to connect it and show you what you can learn from here. So the sugya starts off with our 2 goats. One of the main things the Kohen Gadol does, the central part of the service, and if you're familiar with the prayers on Yom Kippur, we go through all of this in Musaf, the extra prayer on Yom Kippur, said in the morning after Shacharit, in Musaf, in the center of the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, we have a huge description of this whole service. So maybe when you hear it this year, it'll mean something a little bit different to you. So the Kohen takes 2 goats. Okay, the Mishnah says about the goats, it says, Shnei Seirei Yom Kippurim. I'll read in Hebrew. You can follow along in the English if you'd like. I'll also explain in English. You take 2 goats. Mitzvatan shiyu shnehem shavim b'mar'a u'bekoma u'bedamim u'belekechatan ke'echad. They have to be equal in height, in looks, in value, all sorts of things. And even if they're not, ksherim, there's the ideal, and then there's, okay, well, if not, it's okay anyway. So you set up these 2 identical goats. Rav Shimshon Raphael has a great explanation of this where he talks about, you take these 2 goats. Well, first I'll say what you do with them, and then I'll explain what he says about it. And then you put them under a lottery. Okay, so let's go back to our picture. You take a lottery, the Kohen pulls out lots. One, it says La Hashem, to God, and one, it says La Azazel. Azazel is, if you know, it's another word for, some people say it's hell. What we're doing, that's a whole other shir. What exactly is Azazel? Are we offering to some angel that's a bad angel and we want to appease him? Is it symbolic, right? What do? We throw it off the cliff, and it's supposed to, right? You might know the term scapegoat. This is where scapegoat comes from. And they throw it off a cliff, and it's supposed to take with it all the sins of the people. So what you do is you line up these 2 goats. They're identical. They look the same, right? We had a whole discussion the other day. How could they possibly look the same? No 2 animals look the same, but okay, they're supposed to look similar. And then one's going to get sent off the cliff, and one is going to be offered as a sacrifice to God. So Shimshon Raphael Hirsch discusses how they're supposed to be identical, and this is supposed to be indicative of your route in life. We all have all the options open in front of us, and you could choose the right way, or you could choose the less right way. And, it's kind of up there for us to choose. It's almost arbitrary, but we have the power to actually influence. That's also not for today. So now, immediately, the Mishnah goes into what happens if, and this is why the lecture is entitled When Things Go Wrong. Meit echad mehem. Now you're sitting there in the temple, and you're all ready, and you have these animals together, and you're ready to go do the most important service of the day, of the most important day of the year. And all of a sudden, you have all your animals ready, everything's set, and the animal drops dead. Okay, so im ad shelo higrim meit, if you haven't yet done the lottery, very easy, just take another goat. That goat had no significance anyway. Take another goat and you're fine. But im higrim meit, if you already did the lottery, then what do? Okay, here we're going to have a picture. 1 second. I'm going to go here. Okay, so one dies. Seir Lazazel dies. So what do? You make a new lottery. Okay, you can ignore the numbers for now, but right now, what do? You make a new lottery. You take 2 new animals because the animals have to undergo a lottery process. So you take 2 new animals. Okay, so now what's the problem? Instead of having 2, one for God, one for Azazel, you now have 2 for, let's say, God and 1 for Azazel, or 2 for Azazel and 1 for God. Well, you definitely don't want that. So you have an extra animal. So what happens? Now, the issue is you have to take each animal in order to be valid for sacrifice or for going off the cliff. has to have undergone a lottery process. So a lottery process has to be done with a new animal. You can't take one that already was part of the lottery. So now we're going to have a discussion of what you do. So this is what you say now. You make a stipulation. Im shel shem met. Actually, the translation here is a little tricky. They're going to translate it a little bit differently than I am. So follow my translation and not what's written here. The translation here is the Sefaria, which is based on the Koran. I'm going to explain it a little bit differently than it says there. It's always the problem with translations. Im shel shem met. If the one that was designated for God dies, so you replace it with the new lottery. And if Azazel, you replace it with the new one. Here comes the important line. V'hasheni, the second one, though, if you're going to sacrifice now the new Seir LaHashem, the second one, or one of them, we don't know which one yet, that's going to be the problem. What happened was we now have, let's say Azazel dies. We now had a lottery that in 2 lotteries, we now have from each lottery a goat that goes to God. Which one gets sacrificed to God, and what happens to the other one? So the other one is left to graze, which means it can't be brought as a sacrifice, but it also is sanctified, so it can't not be brought as a sacrifice. So we leave it until it gets a blemish. Once it's blemished, it can't be sacrificed anymore. You sell it, you take the money, and you give it as voluntary offerings. That's a whole other thing. It's not even so important for our purposes. It just means it's kind of stuck. There's nothing you could do with it, and you can't sacrifice it, but you also can't not sacrifice it. So you do something in between. The whole discussion of the Gemara now in today's daf, that was from Samach Bet 2 days ago. That was the Mishnah. What the Gemara does is it explains the Mishnah. So therefore, it's now going to say, well, when it said the second one, which was the second one? And for this, we're going to go back to the pictures. We have 2. One dies. What do? We make a new lottery. So here comes our new lottery. We now have 2 more animals. The problem is that we have 3 animals. So Rav says, Hasheni, it says, let's read it inside. He says, let's go back to the words. Sorry. Sheni shebezug rishon yikrav. The second of the first pair gets sacrificed. V'sheni shebezug sheni yir'eh. So the first one gets sacrificed. Sorry. Okay. And the second one is left to graze. So when it says sheni, when it says the words sheni shebezug, sheni yir'eh ad sheyista'ev, what's it referring to? The second of the 2, you see the 1 and 2 here? It's the second of all the goats that are going to God. The second one of that is left to graze, and the first one is sacrificed. The next opinion has a different way of reading it. Rabbi Yochanan says, Sheni shebezug rishon yir'eh. It's the first one that is left to graze, and Sheni shebezug sheni yikrav. So you follow, he says the first one is the one that's left to graze, and the second one is the one that gets sacrificed. Now, how does he read the words, Hasheni yir'eh ad sheyista'ev? He reads it as the second, and here you see the number system. The second is, in this lottery that we had, the first lottery, there were 2 goats. One went to Azazel and died. That's number 1. Number 2 is left to graze, and you take the second one. You take the new animal that you from the second lottery. Now, the whole question is, b'mai kamiflage. What? It sounds very arbitrary. First here, second one, who cares? What's the issue here? So they're going to say that there's something very significant underlying their opinions. Rav savar ba'alei chayim einam nidchim. Rabbi Yochanan savar ba'alei chayim nidchim. What does this mean? Ba'alei chayim nidchim, ba'alei chayim einam nidchim. So the issue is that we started with a lottery. We had 2 animals. Everything was good to go. And then what happens? Our unexpected situation. Animal drops dead. What are we supposed to do? So comes Rav and he says, listen, it's true that for a time, a few minutes, that one goat that was left couldn't be used because it always needs to have a pair. If its pair is missing, you can't do anything with it. But, so that was temporary. So you resolve the problem. We go back to where we were. We had that first one ready. All he needed was a pair to go along with him. We fixed that by instituting this new lottery. We do a new lottery. The one from the lottery that goes to Hashem, we don't need because we have one already. And we use that one. Comes Rabbi Yochanan, he says, no, this is the temple. In the temple, you can't use a reject. That animal got rejected. We had to. Everything was set up. It was perfectly fine. Something went wrong. Well, when something goes wrong, you got to start from scratch. It's not going to help you. Get rid of that original goat. Okay, we can't really get rid of it, but leave it to graze until it gets a blemish, and then you can deal with it. But you need a new animal. You need a new animal that nothing went wrong with it. This is the temple. The temple is all about perfection. You can't have an animal that was rejected for some reason and then bring it back in. So we have two different approaches here. And it's a little bit of an approach about how perfect is the temple and how perfect is the world of the temple and how much do we strive for perfection. And yet, right, and this is, you can already be thinking in your head, this is a model for life, right? We always want to strive for perfection. Even in the beginning there, it said the two seirim, the two goats should be identical in every way. But if they're not, it's okay. Yes, there's a perfect world, and we always want to create as perfect a world as we can. But sometimes we have to understand that that doesn't always work. And when it doesn't work, the question is, where do we proceed from there? And then we have these two approaches. Do you say, well, start from scratch, redo, right? Like this morning, I started going down that street and I saw those two big trucks in front of me. And I said, I'm really running late. What do? Do I wait? Is there going to be some way I can pass them? Or do I just start all over and take a whole different route, go a little bit out of my way now, but at least I'll get there in time, right? So it's this idea of what tools do we have? And I want to talk a little bit about the Masechet as a whole, which for those learning, it'll be nice to kind of connect the dots between different things we've been talking about. And for those not learning, I'll give you a little bit of perspective of the whole tractate that we've been learning. So Yoma starts off with the Mishnah that says, the first Mishnah in Yoma is 7 days before Yom Kippur, we separate the Kohen Gadol from his wife. He can't be with his wife because we're worried he'll get some sort of impurity and he won't be able to do the job. And not only that, but we put a Kohen Gadol in waiting, just in case something happens to him, in case he dies, in case he gets impure. Some people say you even have another wife because he has to be married. And what if his wife were to die? And they take all sorts of precautions to make sure. You think about the temple, right? I don't know how much you ever imagine really the temple, but you imagine this glorified place, beautiful, pristine, right? You always see it in the pictures. If you've seen pictures of the temple, it's gold everywhere and it's beautiful and it's shiny. If you've been learning Masechet Yoma, you realize that there's blood on the floor and there was blood on the parochet, which is the curtain. It wasn't exactly the most clean, pristine place. And it was a place with a lot of real life things going on. So just to give you some examples of things that connect to the same idea of kind of preparing for the unknown and what could go wrong. So another thing that just came up in a few pages ago was Imad shelo gamara tamatano. One of the things you do from in the services when you slaughter the animal, you take the blood and you put it on the altar and you put it in the Holy of Holies and you put it in a few different places. And it says, what if you didn't finish doing that and the blood spilled? Okay, this is a different kind of mistake than the animal dropping dead. The animal dropping dead, okay, nobody really could have prevented that. But the blood spilling, that's the Kohen, the high priest's fault, right? You're holding it, right? I said this morning in class and I was teaching this, you can imagine him holding it, right? He's very nervous. I mean, he's about to go into the Holy of Holies, which only one person enters one time a year and it's him. If he doesn't do things right, he could die. And, he must be shaking a little bit. And theoretically, you can imagine the blood spilling from his hand. So what do you do if the blood spills? So here again, there's a debate because this is something they grappled with. They wanted to come up with all the possibilities and they wanted to give you a boilerplate for how do you handle. So you bring new blood, meaning you have to sacrifice a new animal and you go back to the beginning. What if it happens, right? And then they basically go through there's different parts, there's different stages. So if it happens in the middle of this stage, you go back to the beginning of that stage, but you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon disagree. And what do they say? You just pick up where you left off. So you sacrifice a new animal, but you keep doing what you did, and you just keep going forward. So again, it's a bit of an attitude. Do you go back or do you just keep going, right? This is something, I think all of us this year have gone through all sorts of, it's been one of those years where we really are dealing with something totally unanticipated. And the question always is, how do we handle it? And what tools do we have to handle it, right? As you could certainly look at governments around the world, and in terms of a government, in fact, it was very interesting. In Bennett's speech last night, he talked about, we have to prepare for the unexpected. We have to we have to think about what pandemic might happen next. And we have to look forward and say what may happen. And that's what's happening in this Masechet. And it's all about accidents that happen, mishaps that aren't, we all know people make mistakes. So spilling the blood is one type. Animal dying, that can happen, right? Kohen Gadol dying, that could happen. What if his wife dies, right? We have to look and think about what all the possibilities are. The most interesting in my mind, I want to give you one more example of something we learned, which is there were jobs in the temple. And in the beginning, Barishonah, this is a really interesting example, and I'll even connect it more to what was going on in the world when we were learning this. I'm sure those here who are learning will remember this. It's hard to forget. In the beginning, this was kind of an awful job. It was a job of taking the ashes from the temple and moving them to a pile. Very dirty job, not exactly the most pleasant. So originally they had it, whoever wanted that job could do it, because who was going to really want that job? But what happened? It turned out people really wanted to do it anyway. So bizman shehem merubim, when it became a job that many people wanted to do, ratzim ve'olim ve'kevesh, they had a race. They said, okay, whoever gets to the top first, zacha, would win the race. He would get to do the job. Sounds like a great plan. Okay, first come, first serve. But okay, well, then they had to come up with, well, what happens if they both get there at exactly the same moment? So then they had this finger system. People put in their fingers, they counted fingers, and then they figured out who would go. It was kind of a random thing. It sounds like a kid's game almost. But what happened? There were two situations that came up in the Gemara that were very, I would say, kind of depressing. There was a case where two people made it at exactly the same time. They're running up that ramp. Right? You imagine those car races where the car pushes the other guy out of the way. So he pushes him off. By the way, it was quite high, the ramp at the top part. Pushes him off. There was this ramp going up to the height of the altar. It was pretty high. He pushes his friend off, and he broke his leg. When the court realized this was a dangerous event, they instituted a lottery system. By the way, it connects with our lottery of the two goats, but a totally different system. They had a lottery system for the for who would get the job. Okay, now I'm going to skip this one. Okay, now the second story is told. So now they give a different one. Another case. They were both running up the ramp. They were going to get there at the same time. And in fact, what happened? They're running up the ramp. One guy starts passing the other. What does the other guy do? He grabs a knife and he stabs him in the heart. Wow. Pushing off and breaking his leg is one thing, but stabbing him is a totally different story, right? This is, way bad. And then the story gets worse, because then the father of that child comes, and it wasn't really a child, but the father of the Kohen comes. He sees his body flickering a little, convulsing. He says, this should be your atonement that my son died, but my son's still alive and the knife is still not impure. So pull out the knife quickly so that the knife doesn't become impure. To which the Gemara responds and says, this is a terrible thing. People have lost all perspective. The father, instead of being sad about his son's death, all he's concerned is the knife and the impurity of the knife, right? Where have we gotten to? What has happened to our world? And then the Gemara says the most interesting part, which is which story happened first? There were these two stories. So if you're going to say Shvichut Damim, that he was murdered first, that was the first story. Remember, the first story said, with the breaking the leg, that they decided to institute a lottery system. But when they broke the leg, they instituted a lottery system. It doesn't make sense to say first a guy died and they didn't institute a lottery system. Then when they broke a leg, they institute a lottery system. That would be ridiculous. So therefore they say it must be they broke the leg first. But then they said, well, if the case of the broken leg happened first, then there would have been a lottery and they would never have come to the murder. So therefore they say in the end, I'm just paraphrasing without reading inside, but now I'll read inside. La'olam deshvichut damim kadim. Really, the murder happened first. And here's the most fascinating part. Me'ikara savor akai ba'almahu. Originally, they thought it was just a fluke. Crazy, right? You see these things. Crazies happens, right? It's going to happen once. It's not going to happen again. I mean, I can't help but think about, right, when we taught this, what had happened? It was right when the Meron disaster happened. And it was this idea of people using this religious fervor to get to, where they wanted to have this religious experience. And in the end, it caused the horrible death of many people. And the big lesson, right, if you go back to Bennett's speech yesterday, right, he said one of the first things we're going to do, which no one can really understand why it hasn't been done yet, is set up an inquiry as to what exactly went wrong here. But here, their first reaction was, this is a crazy thing. The other thing I'm thinking about now is, why is the street being closed right around the corner from me by Bennett's house? Because there have been major death threats. And you think about Retzach Rabin and the murder of Rabin, and, people say, oh, one time it'll never happen again. And now people have been saying that the talk in the last number of days is scaring people into thinking that we're back into that kind of environment. And what happened was here is originally they thought this is just a one-off. But since they saw that it happened again and someone broke a leg, now it's true, breaking a leg is not as bad as murder, but they saw that he broke a leg, they realized this is a problem. This is not just a one-off. And you say again, in Meron also, they should have seen the signs earlier, but sometimes it takes some time to realize that you have to act, right? But don't wait till the tragedy happens. Act beforehand, plan ahead, think about how you're going to do things. And I think that what you've seen from everything that we learned is that with the Gemara setting up here, and again, talking about Yom Kippur being the day, the highlight of the year, and in the most sanctified place in our tradition, in the temple, even in the Holy of Holies, and everything seems so pristine and perfect. But life is not pristine and perfect, and things don't always go exactly as planned. And what the Gemara is setting up is lessons about how to, right? If you had a plan and you knew, like I mapped out my route home, I knew in advance that likely, it's true, yesterday they hadn't yet closed the street, and I wondered if the street was really going to be closed or not. But I said, you know what, let's plan. There's a likelihood that street's going to be closed. And there's a likelihood that on my way home from school, the same trucks that were blocking that street were likely going to be closed again. So I mapped out myself a different route about how to get there in time so I could get to this lecture in time. Likewise, with the Masechet is setting up here, and the rabbis are so conscious about, the world of the rabbis is not this perfect world. There's a lot of things that go wrong in that world. And even all over the Gemara, you've probably heard some Talmudic stories about rabbis who did some inappropriate things. And everything is in here, everything. And all about human error and all issues that come up about humanity in general. And in this Masechet, a lot of it is planning ahead. And I think it all connects, even though I said that we've been learning 63 pages, we haven't yet touched on repentance. I think repentance is all part of the same idea. It's about planning ahead, thinking, planning, mapping out, what are my, kind of figuring out when I get into that difficult situation, how am I going to approach it? And then, as always in the Gemara, and one of the fascinating things about Gemara is there's all different opinions, different approaches. How do we view this? How do we want our temple to look? Can we take animals that were rejected or can we not? Do we view them as rejected or not necessarily? Right? And maybe taking something that was rejected and allowing it to be brought is saying that there's room for repentance. You can always change your ways. Just because you're rejected today doesn't mean you'll be rejected tomorrow. And it's this idea of constantly rethinking, reevaluating. So that was our learning element for today. And what I want to talk about a little bit before I finish and open to questions is this idea about women's learning. And I think it's also something, what's happened recently is also something a little bit unexpected, right? The track of Jewish life many, many years ago was that the learning was the men's realm. And it really was because, again, the women weren't involved in other things. But when things change and women are now doctors and lawyers and professionals, and in every field, there's women working in all sorts of fields, and their Jewish education remains in the old model at a much lower level without having access to the Talmud, which is really sits at the base of almost most of our religion, is derived from the Talmud. And having a very basic knowledge of that is really depriving women of the ability to have a meaningful, I'm not saying you can't have a meaningful religious life without it, but it adds meaning to one's life. And it gives, first of all, Daf Yomi gives amazing structure. I can't tell you how many people told me that through COVID, Daf Yomi kept them going, having a daily learning, connecting with people around the world who are learning with you, having conversations with people around the world. On my Zoom, I have people from Australia in the morning, and I have people from the West Coast in LA, and I have people from New York who don't sleep and they're up at 12 o'clock at night and they come on, and I have people in Israel. And it's this bringing together of people around the world, creating this community of people who all share a love of learning Torah together and share their thoughts and their and insights into what does this mean for me as a person? And everybody reads it in a different way, which is also fascinating. My whole way of teaching has changed by experiencing the learning from the perspective of my students who are learning it in a different way than I am. I kind of grew up with Talmud, but people who didn't grow up with Talmud they have a whole different perspective, which is often a very refreshing perspective. And it's changed the way I read the text. So what I want to invite you to do is find some interesting way of learning, connecting. It's not only about women, it's about people all around the world, connecting through Torah, through learning text, through developing their understanding and having a deeper understanding of religious tradition, which, as I showed you today, doesn't only include, what kind of sacrifices we bring or what are the laws about things that maybe are practical, but it's not just about laws. It includes so much more about the rabbis from so many years ago have so much to say about things even as basic as, making decisions about all sorts of things that might come your way. So with that, I'll open to questions. I'm happy to talk about other things of interest about this topic. So with that, we'll open.
Thanks, Michelle. We have a question from the very beginning of your talk. So if you just bear with me, I'll pass the microphone.
So thank you so much for your wonderful introduction for us to the Talmud. And one of the things I was interested in your introduction, where you said that the reason that women were not learning Talmud through the several thousand years that we've had it is because the women were not intellectually oriented. I mean, I know that you're in a society that's misogynistic and you have to give over the topic in the way that people want to hear it. That's a very important part of your role, is to give over for people to hear it. If you're living in a misogynistic society, you want to hear the women are intellectual. But we have to acknowledge the fact that it was usher for women to learn these texts according to the texts themselves, and to sort of that it was different. I mean, all kinds of very strong language in the text itself, besides the fact that we know that women are not as smart as men. Of course, they're not as smart as men, but even if they're a little bit smart, they should be given the option of having it, but it's awesome. So I think that it's important. I mean, I really acknowledge your approach to this, that we have to make this sound a little less awful than it is, but I think that it sort of diminishes the fact that we have the reality of the text itself makes it difficult for us to approach it. So just, I mean, again, you're a teacher.
I'm straining to hear you, but I'm trying to think about what you're saying. Are you saying that women shouldn't be learning because it says in the text that women shouldn't be learning, or are you saying that the texts were written by people who didn't think women should be learning? I'm trying to, it's hard to hear every word you're saying, so.
Do you want me to frame the question for you?
Yeah, just frame it very briefly. So
she's asking how you're balancing that tension between.
Okay.
So Michelle, I'll say it myself. What I'm trying to say is, when you give over the reason women didn't learn Talmud for 2,000 years as that they weren't intellectual, it kind of diminishes the fact that the women were forbidden to learn the text by the text itself.
Okay, so first of all, it's hard to say that they were really forbidden, because women did learn. There's Bruria, and she comes up in the Gemara, and she is highlighted as a woman who the rabbis went to with the questions. So I don't agree that women were forbidden. It's true, it says women shouldn't learn, but I don't take women shouldn't learn as women were forbidden. My understanding is they didn't believe that women should be taught en masse. That they didn't believe. And they couched it in saying anyone who teaches their daughter Torah, it's as if they're teaching her tiflut, which whatever tiflut means, there's different interpretations, but it's looked at as this is a very negative thing. So I want to say a few things. Number one, there's a few isolated statements in the Gemara that talk about not teaching women. It's possible, as many things, that there were different approaches in the Talmud. And that's why on the one hand, you have Bruria, who was knowledgeable, and there's other women throughout history. For example, one of my favorite passages is the Drisha, who's a commentary on the Torah. It's a commentary written in the 1500s. And in his introduction, he praises his mother, who taught women of the community halacha, and she knew everything, and she would go correcting people who were doing things wrong. And there's many women throughout history, individuals, as I said, who learned. But as a whole, they didn't teach the women because, look at it, it's not just in Judaism. I mean, years ago, they brought me to teach in my daughter's class in 6th grade. And I wanted to teach about Daf Yomi. I was near the beginning of the cycle at the time. And I brought her an example of the late 1800s in America where women weren't allowed to be lawyers because they couldn't own land by American law. So we're not talking about just Judaism, but women in general were not studying books. In any religion, in any non-religion, they just weren't. So the issue is that when the feminist movement started, Judaism took, I think, a lot longer to get on board with it because it's harder to make change in Judaism, certainly in the Orthodox world, more so than in other denominations. But it took a while for that to change the perspective. But then it's not me who's saying women should be learning, but Rabbi Soloveitchik. And the Chavetz Chaim talked about how women should be learning Mishnah. And then Rabbi Soloveitchik took that to women learning Gemara. And it was a process. And other rabbis as well. At this point, I think for the most part, again, there are people who think that women shouldn't be learning Gemara, but for the most part, we're beyond that. What I wanted to do at the Siyum HaShas was to take it to the next step, which is, yes, most people, certainly in our world, think that it's okay for women to learn. The issue is, and this I noticed as soon as I started advertising for the Siyum HaShas, I started asking around, will you come? A lot of conversations with people. Well, yeah, but Gemara is not my thing. I don't really learn Gemara. It's not really what I do. It's, and most women I spoke to said, yeah, maybe, I think women can learn. Maybe I'd be happy to encourage my daughters to learn, but it's not for me. And my goal at the Siyum was to say, why are you saying that? Have you tried it? Have you tried it in a good way? Have you had a good teacher who taught you? Have you learned it in a way that speaks to you? Because there's so many ways to learn Gemara and there's so many things one can take from there. And many, many women, one of the things I said at the Siyum was, this is open to everybody. And there's so many people I spoke to who said, I heard you say that. And I said, let me try it. And they tried it and they're hooked and they've been learning it ever since. And it's opened up a world to them that they never had access to. And again, I don't think it's such a huge question as to, is it allowed or is it not? Again, there are people who still don't think it's permitted to them, but there's even Haredi women, groups of Haredi women who learn Gemara now. And in fact, at the Siyum, we had a little video clip of 2 Haredi women who are working on social change within the Haredi movement. And one of them said, I asked my father to buy a Gemara. So my mother didn't understand why I was doing this. My father understood right away. And it's something that also S.D. Rosenberg spoke about. Her father, Rav Lichtenstein, and her grandfather, Rav Soloveitchik, who both said it wasn't a question, because if you want to enter that world of Torah, most people, right, the connection is through learning Torah. And she said, it wasn't a question, boys, girls, it was everyone is equal and everyone's part of that world. And there's no reason anyone should be closed off to that. So that's I hope that addressed your question. If there was something I didn't address, feel free to ask.
You might get a call from her later.
Pleasure.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask just specifically about the piece of Gemara, the one where the guy got killed. The kind of that whole dynamic and how obviously Gemara is quite.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. It's hard to hear. Can we figure out?
So
Maybe come to the computer and it'll be easier if I can also see your face. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, much
Okay.
better.
I wanted to ask just about the piece where the guy gets killed, like he gets stabbed when because it's obviously very competitive. And the Gemara is clearly quite disapproving of that.
And clearly they think that that's not okay. And I wanted to me, it felt like it had kind of some echoes of like a lot of the Agadah to kind of pre the destruction, where there's like a lot of, as in there's this whole kind of narrative about the temple being destroyed because of lack of Ahavat Yisrael, and kind of that kind of dynamic. So I'm wondering if there's, I mean, I don't know if there's links to text or kind of conceptually, kind of like if that, because obviously there's like that gets played out in the bigger picture between the kind of warring groups, but this seems like a kind of, as in it's a vignette that's quite personal. It's one person and another person, and they seem very like they're very like frum in the way that they're like they want to give the korban to God, but then they're happy to kind of kill each other in the process. Anyways, I'm wondering if you have kind of reflections on that. And
from a historical perspective,
yeah, historical perspective, like if the timing is meant to be that it's kind of relatively close to that, to kind of that time period, I guess.
So yeah, I mean, one of the things I didn't mention is that what's clear there also, it had to do with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, who were different sects, right? The Pharisees are the rabbis, and the Sadducees are, most of the Kohanim were Sadducees, and the Prushim Stukim. And what's going on here also, which also permeates the Masechet in all different places, is this tension between them, that the rabbis were running the halachic world, and the Kohanim, the priests, were running the temple world. And also, once the destruction happened, there was no more temple world, and the rabbis were trying to solidify their position. And some of it, and one of the things that the Sadducees were known for was obsessivity over purity and impurity.
Right. Okay.
And what's going on with that story with the father, where that was all he was caring about, was a way of the Pharisees kind of poking at, kind of saying to them, what's wrong with you? And you've lost your perspective.
So the father,
one thing I also want to say about Talmudic stories is they likely didn't happen, and that they're trying to get at these messages. It's not that they didn't exactly happen, but the rabbis tell them in a way that the rabbis use them like a rabbi does in a speech or any lecture, right? They take it and they use it for what they want and the message that they want to get across, and they make things extreme. And it's very likely, by the way, these were two variations of the exact same story. The Gemara kind of assumed one happened before the other, but it's much more likely that the story happened once and the story got embellished. Maybe it started, someone broke someone's leg, and then someone tells the story and they say he killed him, and then they add about the impurity because they wanted to make a point. And I think it's definitely viewed in a historical context, which, by the way, connects with my previous question. Again, you have to remember these rabbi statements were made in a particular historical context.
Yeah.
So to understand, obviously it gets dangerous where you draw the line.
Cool. No, thank you. No, I was saying, you're saying it is kind of part of that broader polemic.
I think it's part of that for sure. Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Come to the front if you have a question. Okay, we have another question. I'm just going to call them to the front.
Okay, that would be great.
Hi. Firstly, thank you so much, Rabbanit Michelle. It was incredible, and I'm just actually wondering, really practically, which I'm sure you were going to mention anyway, how to join the Daf Yomi, and if you have space.
How do you join?
Okay, so one thing about Daf Yomi, it has a start, a middle, an end, but it doesn't really. So even though it started a year and a half ago and it will finish in 6 years from now, you can enter into Daf Yomi at any point. You don't need to catch up. You can always do a siyum 7.5 years from whenever you start. You can skip a few sections and go back. You can do it when it works for you and not do it. You can learn at your own pace. You can say, I'm going to take one Masechet and I'm going to learn just that, one daf a week. You can learn it any way you want. So the real Daf Yomi is to learn it on the cycle and with everybody, but there's so many different ways that you can learn Talmud. And on our website, which is hadran.org.il, if you Google Hadran, Hadran, you'll find it. On our site, there's different ways. If you get to the main page, you can learn. You can see it says today's daf right at the top. Even you can just click on it. And there it has a video from YouTube of the class. It has usually a study guide, has an audio version. It's meant so that if you want something light on your phone and just an audio, because you're going to work or something and you just want to listen while you're on your way to work, you can do it easily on audio. If you want something heavier like a video, you can watch a video. If you prefer to see someone live, there's a Zoom class every day. As I said, it's 7:10 in the morning, Israel time. So I don't know, that comes out to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon here, I think. 2:10, does that make sense? 7 hours. Anyway, I think it's 2:10 in the afternoon. You can join the Zoom. The link is on our site. Also on every daf post has a link to the Zoom. So you can join the Zoom, which is nice because after the class, there's conversation with people. There's also WhatsApp groups. We have a WhatsApp group in Australia. So you can join people who are living in Australia that you can communicate with. And if they're living in your city, you can have get-togethers, and people sometimes have Zoom get-togethers or physical get-togethers and discuss. And something comes up in the daf that you were thinking about, and they communicate with each other. So there's so many different ways you can do it. You can, by the way, the podcast, the audio, you can subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, and it'll come to your phone every day. So it's very easy to get into the rhythm of that kind of learning. All the details are on our website. And the other thing that we have, which if you don't want to delve into Daf Yomi yet, so as I said, you can either choose a tractate and just learn it in order, which you can search any tractate, any page on our site. The other thing you can do is we have things that are written on a weekly basis, some in Hebrew, some in English. There's also a podcast called Talking Talmud by two women, which is a daily podcast, 20 minutes. It doesn't go through the whole page. It goes in depth into one thing. So if you prefer something more in depth, because Daf Yomi is quite, fast paced and not as much in depth. So you can listen to them. They have something always to say on the daf. So you could be in the daf without actually learning the whole daf, but learning something from each daf. We have a weekly thing called Flashback, which is written by Shuli Mishkin, which has historical perspective on things that come up in the daf. And there's a few things in Hebrew, if your Hebrew is good. So we have all sorts of ways that you can engage in Talmud study. And the other thing that we launched this year before Pesach, which now sits on our website, is you can take a course in learning skills about how to learn Gemara. So we did a 10-week course before Pesach on Pesachim, all about things having to do with the Seder night. And it was a 10-week course with Chavruta study with guided sheets, which you can either find someone to learn with, or you could do it on your own with guided sheets where you have to try to learn it on your own with the translation. And I ask questions, and then you listen to the videos, kind of have an intro video, you do the work on your own. You have another video, then you do the work on your own, and then a closing video, and kind of pulls it all together. And it's a way of independent study. So we're trying to create all sorts of ways. That was an online class that then sits on our site. We're going to have another one, probably a 4-week session of that starting in, I think we plan for December. So throughout the year, we'll have probably 2 of those every year to help people advance in their Talmud study, to give you the basic skills, because it's a whole language. It's a whole way of thinking. You have to get into it. So there's all different entry points. We try to make it so that it fits whatever lifestyle you have and how much time you're willing to commit to it.
Thank you so much. Would you mind just repeating the website name again?
H-A.
What? H-A-D-R-A-N. I can also write it in the chat for those here. It's hadran.org.il.
Thank you. I'll give you this and I'll just take a photo later.
Any other questions from anyone in the audience? No? Michelle, thank you so much. I'm just make sure I didn't. And Di says, if anyone wants to join the Sydney Duff group, they should speak to the Sydney Duff group representative in the audience. So for anyone who wants to do that, thank you so much. If you
want to join the groups, by the way, on our website, there's something called communities. And there's a link to join the different WhatsApp groups that exist. So that's where you would go on the community page on the website. And then you can go there and find where your community is and if we have a group there. I forget exactly where they are all in Australia. I think we have a Melbourne and a Sydney group.
Amazing. So, thank you so much. So huge round of applause.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really great.
Outstanding, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Hope it goes a little bit more as planned.
Yes, well, you'll be open, you'll manage. Okay. Whose notes do I have?
Emma.
So, star, but guest. All right.